like very Platonic. It's just very kind of like, well, Plato, was the Cratylus. The first chapter is about the Cratylus idea. The things are not stable in the present. They have no presence, and that instability causes them to be dualistic. And they're materially, first he says they're materially dualistic, and then he says, well, maybe there's some language reasons for this too. So it's kind of squirrely about that. I don't know if he really believes that there's a dualism in reality. But I like that idea. I like the dualism in reality because it's Pyrrhonic, so to speak. I said there was this philosopher that believed that matter was, that reality was unstable and unpredictable. Which is quite different from the way scientists and philosophers think today. So, but Plato reported on some of this, so that's how Deleuze apparently got into the idea. Socrates was talking about it, in the Cratylus.
I did read a Mad magazine comic once, which had the story of Robinson Crusoe, and he ends up on the island. And he ends up building a complete city with a nuclear power plant, which is, the ridiculous aspect. Yeah, I was long aware of that ridiculous aspect. Our traditional story is that, he lands there and rebuilds England with even the aristocracy. But of course, in reality, Selkirk, when they found him, was more like Mad Ben out of Treasure Island.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Does anyone want to talk about what was it called? The guy on the island, marijuana or whatever her name was.
Robinson.
Maria. Yeah.
Oh.
Huh?
Robinson.
Yeah, the Robinson Crusoe. Yeah. Anybody want to talk about Robinson Crusoe? Because I don't really get Robinson Crusoe. I remember when I was a kid, I didn't finish the real Robinson Crusoe, and and this guy's talking about a French Robinson Crusoe, and so not very many people are exposed to that.
Yeah, well, the French is a sort of a postmodernist Robinson Crusoe, which is perhaps more realistic in some ways, where he does start to go down the line. I think there was might have been a movie made of it where the French Robinson Crusoe gets introduced to cannibalism by Friday.
What did they eat on Thursday?
well, some other natives came on the island with Friday, and of course he killed some of the other natives, and so he was burying the body of the native he killed, and Friday was going, "Why are you doing that? You're burying good food. That's disrespectful to the corpse." So Friday said, to be with me, you've got to become like me. So he was roasting a leg. And Robinson Crusoe, in the end, he picks up the leg and takes a bite, and then he faints. I just remember that bit of the French movie.
Okay.
But of course, this is the whole point, that once all our reference points go, the reality is the person on the island doesn't really become insane, but they might appear to be insane. But the interesting point is that these people weren't unhappy. They weren't depressed. Maybe it's really fantastic to be on an island all by yourself and nobody else will bother you and just run around like a madman, We're the ones that are repressed. That's the argument.
Yeah, I mean, sure. The question of what are your morals when you don't have anything to tell you what your morals are, which is dangerous, right? It's really interesting.
I know Matt alluded to the idea of people still having morals, even with the separation from connection to a culture that's indoctrinated people with the ideas of what's right and wrong. And so he basically indicates, I think the phrase he used he didn't elaborate, because I'm sure that's another question for another time, but something to the effect of that, oh yeah, morality is based on desire, not necessarily on the logic of it, which I thought was an interesting thing. I'm coming into this discussion late. I found I was unable to watch the 2 videos and be able to participate. I'm sort of a one video gal. That's about all I had time for. But I did have a chance to watch the first, or listen to Matt's first Deleuze video or presentation in this one, and I enjoyed it. I know you guys have already got one session ahead of me where you probably have discussed a lot of these things, but I did find that he touched on some of the gaps that I felt existed in Heidegger's work, because I questioned the idea of subjectivity ever leaving, and I think in discussions that some of us had that were part of the Heidegger group, the same group but earlier on, often talked about, well, how could you actually look at a world that you existed part of? Where would the subjectivity be? And then we often use the expression that you're living on the edge. That's about the best you can do. And here, Deleuze kind of speaks to that further, about how there's a need to get even further away. As Stephen said, further away to the point of madness. Perhaps not, perhaps.
Yeah. So the Robinson Crusoe story, to me, it in the words of Deleuze, he it seems to pose the question for me that I posed earlier about Levinas. That Levinas makes ethics, or at least being with the other, a first philosophy. But really, I mean, other people are extremely, important. But I mean, I view them as a contingent fact of our, existence. So, is it really proper to make the other the basis of a philosophy? It might be a basis of a anthropology, but not of a philosophy.
Gary, can I propose? I like your thought, and Shauna. When I read this particular installment after having read Levinas, the word that seemed to keep coming up to me was Deleuze's in opposition to this idea of the other as an individual, the face of the other. He's proposing what I almost call otherism. And the point being, he's focused, his emphasis is on the structural, it's almost his first argument is structuralist in nature, and it sounds like structuralism, the interrelation and between us and others. And then he goes on to ask us, well, what would happen if you lost, or if that interrelation or that otherness that is part of you, you can almost call it ontic, part of your very being, if it went away. Levinas, he wants us to approach the others and to use them as part of an ethical project, whereas Levinas, I think he goes much farther and is suggesting that we reflect on this whole thing between us and others that is much deeper and much more ontological, and in this whole Robinson, Michel Tournier version of Robinson Crusoe, Deleuze, from my readings, he uses that to tell us, it's a cautionary tale about how dependent we are on others, whether we admit it or not. So that was I think, that's a kind of the concept of otherism.
I wanted to just ask a question about the thing that you said, Shauna, the fact that people are that there seems to be a gap between subjectivity and the reality, or subjectivity and the other. Certainly, the Heidegger tries to create the distance between the subjectivity and the mass of and the they, but the what as a mass, as a inherent consciousness, an inherited presupposed consciousness. But since Heidegger is interested in objective reality, because he has this phenomenological concern, as well as the ontological building out of design, only, very, very, very clear about that. This is only an ontological build out of design, and of course, like all human species, should be examples of that. Although, in terms of philosophies like fascism, it doesn't work out that way. So, I'm just wondering, I mean, what's bothering me a lot is how much Heidegger was really concerned about the subjectivity of objective phenomena, and so, in other words, how, since I rely so much on this type of phenomenology and logic, I'm just wondering, do we really, is there really that much there? Is there really when we say there is another, and the theory of the face and things like that, but also the unknown other, the idea that things have two material substances, a kind of like a physical dualism, I think that's kind of bright. I like it. I think there are ideas in Deleuze that kind of appeal to me, but and maybe I'm really prejudiced. I read a little Plato, and if he says, this idea is from Cratylus, and I kind of like, oh yeah, I guess so. But then he kind of like hedges back and forth, and he says, well, it might be the material dualism, or it might just simply be language slipping between the cracks, as it were. Like bones and muscles, bones and tendons. So yeah, I'm just really a little bit puzzled. I'm probably going to have to make it through an entire Deleuze book at some point, to try to sort of figure out where I stand, because he tickles my fancy, but at the same time, I'm so much in favor of the Aristotelian line.
Let's say Hegelian. Hegelian.
Well,
how are you on Hegel?
No name calling, okay, Stephen?
Well, I mean, as you're talking, and this is what always bothered me about Heidegger and the phenomenological approach, was that generally from coming from a background of qualitative research, normally when you speak and you're trying to be as unbiased as possible, but ultimately what you do is you locate yourself. So I would locate myself in my background, my gender, and various other things, indicating that there invariably will be some bias because to even speak on a matter, I'm going to be coming from my subjected point of view. Mm-hmm. So here, when Deleuze is talking and saying Nietzsche as well as saying that it's still too human, Heidegger is still too human, I agreed with that. The difference, though, is that with Heidegger, what I had issue with is I think he kind of almost believes that it's possible to be able to go in from the edges, understand our world, and I'd say yes, we can, but it's always going to have bias. That was my feeling, is that ultimately it's always going to have bias. What I like about what Deleuze speaks to is similar again to sort of a qualitative approach to life, is that one way to get out of bias is that if I interviewed many different sources, just by the fact that I'm getting all these different points of view, even though I'm biased with my own, it helps create a more diverse perspective on a topic. And so that's where I'm making connections with Deleuze, is sort of from this qualitative, trying to see the world as cleanly as possible without being stuck by rigid pre-assumptions. And then also to what Terry had said, because Terry, you talked about, well, that's a whole nother topic, but the whole idea of what is an individual, and Deleuze is also making a statement that we're not sort of in this idea that we sit alone, that ultimately we're always part of the system. So, that's another huge topic to get into as well, that I think speaks to that. And I think, Derek, you were hitting on it as well, this idea of individualism and what it actually means.
But is there any point where we can take this kind of creative approach to edgeism and make it? Does it ever become? Is there a possibility that it becomes rigorous again? Can we ever make it rigorous? Can we ever bring it back? Can we ever make it more Germanic, if you will? In other words,
so you agree with Hegel, do you?
Oh my gosh. I guess the argument to that, James, would be that it wasn't stable before. It's actually moving into more stability, even though it feels less so. Because and that was a third point I had with Deleuze's work, is that and actually Matt references it, and he says here where Deleuze is talking about this need to get out of the box, to really put us, like Nietzsche was so far ahead of his time that people thought he was a madman, but almost to go on those edges, on those journeys. And that yet what we spend a lot of our time in philosophy doing is listening to people who lived not only in mainstream, but elite positions. And so does it really represent life? Like, where are the philosophers represented by different ethnicities, different socioeconomic so it's I thought he hit it on the nail too, of, philosophy is supposed to dig really deep. It's supposed to ask the big questions, yet we're only really asking the questions of a very select group of people.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to ask the big questions, I mean, Heidegger is perhaps the person to go, the question of being, but then again, I mean, I think there's a lot of, mistakes there. And then with the question of being, you get this idea that we are pursuing, reality in some way, objective, reality, which is, I think, going down the wrong path. In this sense, I mean, I have a question about Deleuze, because he confuses me, because phenomenologists, postmodernists are supposed to be can be defined as not wanting a conception of reality, objective reality, of discarding an overarching, principle of life because it's too diverse and one isn't there anyway. But you're
talking about a world conception.
You can
Most people tend to operate on the window, world conception.
No, an overarching, a conception of the world, like perhaps
the worldview. Yeah, worldview. The Weltschau or something like that. The way the world shows itself. The way the world. It was like what is it? Carl. Who is that guy again? Heidegger's friend. Heidegger's friend, the other existentialist.
Karl Jaspers.
Karl Jaspers, yeah. So
with existence spelt with a Z.
Right, and the idea that there's a special one for mankind, a special kind of existence that man experiences, and Heidegger picks up that idea from Jaspers, but also the idea of the worldview. The stimulating idea in Jaspers is the idea that there are many worldviews in mankind, and everyone develops a worldview. But go ahead, Derek. I didn't mean to. I'm sorry I interrupted.
Great, thanks for adding. But I mean, that's what confuses me a little bit about Deleuze, is that he claims to be interested in metaphysics, but metaphysics to me is a attempt to establish a worldview. I mean, in fact, my question also is there any such thing as a metaphysics? Can anybody explain to me what metaphysics is without going into linguistic, phenomenology of
metaphysics,
language, logic, all these aspects of life? Can there be a metaphysics? I mean, somebody explain to me. I mean, my answer to my own question is no.
Well, metaphysics is a nasty word, but I'll let you give a definition, Stephen, if you want to.
Metaphysics in philosophy pretty much just refers to the phenomena of subjectivity in the mind. Like, we're pretty sure that we can do physics on a car engine, right? That's out there in the physical world. But what do we do with the mind? A little bit trickier. So,
right, but the things. Okay.
World.
Yeah, the things that are not specifically related to words, the things that are unspoken, the things that are not there's somebody I watched a great video on YouTube, and the guy goes through like about 8 or 9 things that constitute metaphysics, and the idea that ontology is one of the main things, but there's ontology, things that don't have their own type of philosophy assigned to them. So ontology, I think logic might be one of them, but I'm not sure, because that's another one. That's not a metaphysics, but there's just these different ideas about how thinking operates, and also what Kant does. Like with the will and the idea that the mind has faculties, and that you can talk about a priori ideas and so forth, ideas and concepts, and you can separate sensation from thinking and so forth, things like that, and all that talking, which is not necessarily based on deduction and not based on dialectical reasoning or anything like that. It's just basically ideas that kind of stand by themselves. That's metaphysics. And there was a kind of a long list, but I don't have it memorized. But the thing that's really interesting about that is when I read Deleuze, I get the feeling that it's almost 100% metaphysics, or it's close to 100%. It's like 90% or 85% metaphysics. You're getting a lot of metaphysics with your logic and philosophy. The sentences all make sense, which is great. But what is he talking about? Is he talking and he's talking about reality, but he's talking about a way that you can't necessarily say two things that agree with each other in the same chapter. You have to say one thing, and it has to conflict with something else, and then he is getting his idea across correctly. Anyone disagree with that? Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say that it helps to know that this piece that we're looking at the end of Logic and Sense, and hey, my name is Bob. I'm kind of new to the group.
Hey, Bob.
That the whole book is really about him challenging this notion of how we make sense of the world, right? And then using this last appendix as one, the example of the Robinson Crusoe, like, do we need others in order to make sense of the world, right? And if you use the Robinson Crusoe example to say, if you're taken out of that other that environment where other people are around, what are the things that sort of start to break down, right? And Robinson Crusoe's first reaction was to just lose it, right, and be upset. And that was his breaking down of not understanding how he related to other people, because there's no other people around. And then he sort of becomes one with the islander, so to speak. Like, it becomes less about how he fits into society and just more about him being. And that's kind of how I take away that little piece in connection to the rest of the book, that it's one more angle on Deleuze's attempt to unpack how he makes sense of things.
I'm glad
Bob, I'm with you.
Deleuze himself says that he's following Marx here in the Grundrisse. I'm sure most of you are familiar with it. The Grundrisse opens up with in the beginning production, but production is more than just material production. What Deleuze and Marx are doing is what Wittgenstein clarified as the public language argument. Even if you're in a cave by yourself meditating, you can't even make sense out of your own internal experiences without a stable external public semantics. And that public semantics is stable not on a written page. It's only stable because the tribe has a consensus that maintains its definition, stability. So even the words in the dictionary have to be interpreted. If you want to know what table means, if you want to know what ego means, all the stuff is going to depend on a consensus. Even if it's bullshit, those are still anchor points that determine the stability of meaning. This is what Deleuze says he's doing in this section. He's following Marx and the Grundrisse. But you can't even have a private, internal, subjective, metaphysical, spiritual anything unless your terms for crystallizing your experience are stabilized in the public lexicon, which is determined by tribal consensus.
But that's a Wittgensteinian view that we can disagree with.
Well,
sure. Oh, I wasn't talking about that. I was talking about what Deleuze is doing.
Yeah. And then it sounds to me that Matt even extended this further, because I always think of this idea of how much does culture impact our own ideas. But it's that non-human component that he also adds in here. And so that even if you have the person living in the cave that doesn't have human influence, there's still, as you said, Scott, that external, I can't remember the phrasing you used, that external semantic, I can't remember the exact term you used, but that's why he brings up these examples of Juana and the wolf, the dog boy, or those kinds of things, that it's still a relationship to something else, to the other, either the other person or the other thing. And that's where that whole idea of individualism is challenged, that we're not this discrete entity, that we're in fact influenced by everything in our context.
I think Shauna and Scott, I think what I'm hearing is the impressions I got out of the piece on Robinson. I think that's exactly when Matt made teams. I thought that was really original and clever. He put Nietzsche and Deleuze on one team, and he put Heidegger, help me here, Sartre and Levinas on another team. And he did that for a reason. My interpretation of that, and then as I listened to the lecture, what he was proposing is that Nietzsche and Deleuze were about a new form of radical individualism as compared to Heidegger, because Heidegger said in order for you to flourish, you're going to need your society or culture. Well, that's not individual. So I liked the way he broke up the teams. It helped me understand the project of Deleuze, that he was kind of like on the same path as Nietzsche, what Nietzsche's path was, but Deleuze was more contemporary. And we should recall, at least I invite us to recall, that just when Deleuze began writing, structuralism was the hot philosophical concept in France, particularly France, as I understand it. And if you read this, you can see post-structuralism. And if you remember, Matt said that the postmodernism course really should be called post-structuralism. And in this piece on Robinson, Deleuze continuously makes reference to structures, particularly, and he called the other that we know, and that Heidegger, the they from Heidegger, he referred to that entity or that grouping as structure other, structure hyphen other. And that was the before, and the after was the de-worlding, where you step away and you lose your ground. Your grounding goes away, where like Scott was talking about, you don't have, you just you're just totally adrift because you don't have the other in your life to totally guide you and give references. So that's what I'm hearing here. I like some of the comments here. Thank you.
I mean, I get the feeling that structuralism was very concerned with social structures, historical structures, rather anthropological structures. There's another form of structure, the structures of the consciousness, but structuralism didn't really make very much of, and postmodernism seems to ignore to some extent. And then perhaps even it seems to me that Deleuze may be even edging into a structuralism with his notion of a difference as a mental structure, something created by a consciousness.
With a little bit I've done on Deleuze on difference, you can begin to hear suggestions of it. When he talks about difference, he's talking about true difference, difference where you don't use some other source for calibrating or deciding what is normal. You use a different set of
alternative.
Yes, thank you.
An alternative. Yeah. Okay.
I think what makes Deleuze so much fun and also so extremely frustrating to read is that he intentionally when you feel like you're getting him pinned down, he intentionally moves out of the way, right? And one of the things he does that with, I think, Derek, you mentioned this, was the structures of the mind, right? And early on, he was really into Lacan and Freud, and then wrote an entire book that said that a lot of that was not right. Right. So I think also what he kind of does is he doesn't want to throw out those structures, but he wants to push against them and say, is that really what's happening here? Is it that our consciousness is structured by, we have to have this other as a referential, or what happens when we remove that other? Does it destroy all of those structures that we have, or does it provide us with some new way of experiencing the world? It's really hard to pin him down on what his answer to that is, in my opinion.
But is that what you were talking about, Shauna, when you said you were doing some research? And were you sort of like in your research? Do you find yourself looking for the alterity, the correct not the established referent, but an alterity to the established referent, that could be based on your known bias? Is that
not so much
sort of in scope? No.
Yeah, and I'm thinking, I guess there could be different agendas, but ultimately, the idea of trying to see the world as openly as possible, especially then, let's say, if you're doing a qualitative research and you're really trying to capture a different culture, and to do that, you might always be putting it under your own lens, and so the attempt is not to do that. But that's why you will still locate yourself, because that's a very difficult task. That kind of complete detachment, it's always spoken through the voice of me as the researcher. And so the best we can do is pretty much warn people, if you will, that this is the background I come from, so that it's going to be, as much as I try for it not to be, it's going to be biased by the lens that I'm seeing things through. And so it's interesting, but there's an absence of that, it seems to me, in some of the philosophical perspectives that I've come across. Even, when they're talking about, now Deleuze speaks to this, and I'm not sure if Matt is the one that puts the frame on this himself, because I know Nietzsche had spoken to the arts and so forth, but that those kind of mediums helping to get you outside of your box, if you will, or outside of your perspective, those were seen as the tools to assist in seeing the world from different perspectives, and ultimately through these different perspectives, hopefully a more realistic view. I think that's the attempt, is the more different views you see the world in, the more likely you are to see it in its truest fashion.
So what you're talking to, if I offer a thought, would be Husserl's in phenomenology concept of bracketing, and that's exactly what he was after, which is a play on an ancient Greek one, which was the epoche, and the epoche was the suspension of judgment, which will facilitate your being able to see reality. You have to suspend judgment. So the epoche, and Nietzsche's concept for this was called perspectivalism, where he talked to this idea that when we come to the project, we bring with us these biases and perspectives that interfere with us seeing reality or seeing the truth.
Okay, but doesn't that kind of relate to how does that relate to the idea of like bring a toolbox with you? In other words, I like that phrase. You have a specific job to do. I use this with politics all the time. If I want to think like a conservative, I'm not extremely conservative, but if I want to think like a conservative to find out what they're doing, like not Trump or anything like that, because he's not a real conservative, but like a real conservative, somebody who has that psychology and the culture type of environment, and is in the political environment of conservatism, and other cultures too. Also, like thinking like a Chinese person, thinking like an Indian person, that kind of thing. So I find it. I really believe I can do that. I can sort of like put myself in another political context because I think politics is really important, and so I'll do that kind of like adjusting. And I think that the word tool set comes to mind. In other words, we have to be able to develop some kind of a tool set to create that shift away from, pure West Coast American or pure indigenous Canadian or pure, Aussie or whatever it is. Just whatever our sort of like set in stone situation is. We have to travel. We have to be capable of using methods of traveling outside it if we want to gain insights into the way other people are thinking about the same problems that you're thinking about. Because the way you think about problems is extremely prejudiced. Trust me. In other words, if you're in one country like the United States and you're thinking about problems in India, you're thinking about problems in China, you're thinking about problems in Europe and so forth, you can't think about those things unless you make the effort to be in the shoes of the man on the street in Berlin or the man on the street in Czechoslovakia or Hunan province and so forth. You've got to kind of
missing it entirely.
Huh? I'm missing it entirely?
The whole question here, and this is a mistake you rationalists keep on doing all the time, is everything is ideas. No, this is about the will. What happens to the will when you take it out of society with different pressures and stick it on an island? Like maybe by the second day, the goats are starting to look rather attractive. But that's the nature of the will. It's this, the will is not thought, it's a force.
Okay, well,
rationalism's always trying to, pull the world apart, it's this little twist here, it's this little turn here. This is about a force. It's like the film California, where David Duchovny is the writer who's trying to work out Brad Pitt's character who's the psychopath. Brad Pitt, at the end of it, says, "You still don't get it. I murder people because I like it."
Yeah, but when you talk about the will, are you talking about Nietzsche's, a will to power, or Heidegger's, interpretation of it as the will to will, or my, interpretation of it as the will to value? I mean, there's quite a lot of things one can say about the will, and can you have a will without a object, a cognitive object? I mean, these are, willing.
It's a belief there is this force in us called the will, and the intellect is just there to size up the environment, and the will is the beast that wants. And it will do things like what's rational about us? If we have objectives, is an objective always rational?
I mean, I think this is a great topic, Stephen. Once you get me started on this, I won't be able to stop. But I'd like to go back to James, because he was talking about different points of view, one's own culture. And I think underlining this is the idea that Terry posed about, reality and truth. I mean, I don't think there is a reality or truth, and it can be misused to support the notion that my perspective is the right one. And here we have the perspectivalism of Nietzsche and Deleuze, perhaps, who seem to be saying there is no one view, truth, or reality. There is just a number of different viewpoints.
Okay, we got a comment from Shauna. It is what Deleuze means. Is this what Deleuze means by the monster of energy? And there's one from Warren. What you're all talking about is affect. I guess that's from David Hume. And then Matt stated in his notes from Shauna. Number three. This is the monster of energy and play of forces, the Dionysian flux of life that pulses in, through, and behind all individuated beings. So there we have the last word.
Well, for the record, Deleuze, who was a psychologist and he teamed up with Guattari, Warren is right on the mark on this one. He was big on affects, which is a psychological sort of phenomena that you can talk about. But that's with an A. I think Warren makes a good point.
Yeah, it's something. Affect is something like the sentiments as one of them, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And also attitudes, sentiments, attitudes, things that I call ethos. By the way, I like the Greek word ethos for affect. The ethos is all the attitudes, the monster, the pure. Oh, this is what I want. This is my philosophy of life. What's your philosophy of life? I don't know if I have one. It's kind of like, what's wrong with you? It's like everybody has to want something in this world. So that's will, or that's Stephen's explanation of will. The will, maybe it's the will to power, or it's the will to truth. It's, in other words, I'm always right. Like I called you talk to someone that you haven't seen in a long time, and you ask them, you say something about something that happened, and it turns out they don't agree with you anymore. They used to agree with you on just about everything, but they don't agree on the stuff that they used to agree with. So the fact that there's this kind of like there's a shifting of the stars, that's for sure, and we're in a universe of ideas, and but yet there is a rational thinking that continues to go on. There's a pure subjectivity in the midst of all this pure, all these purities that Deleuze is talking about. There's also the pure subjectivity, the thinking of the rational mind that goes on, and the intercommunication between people. Trying to agree on what's what. So that's all I'm saying is that there is a necessity for this. We think about things. Timothy, your radio is on. Yeah. We think about things, and we. Who's that? That's Timothy still. Yeah. Okay. Anyway. There's the thinking we do about things, but then there's the need to kind of make a referent, and we have to make a referent of what we're thinking about. And Deleuze is, for me,
I'm watching gay pornography of men having sex.
Excellent, but if you're not bombing us, don't. Yeah, but we're looking forward to your comments, further comments. But I guess the it's what we do, what we need to accomplish in our discourse and with our thinking, that I think is what matters a lot. And so there's a danger to staying in suspension on a social level about everything. So we need to be able to bring things. We need to bring ideas to fruition. We need to make ideas count. Yeah, we're having a meeting, Amir.
Sorry, nigger.
Okay.
Yeah, we just need to do a block on this one because
Yeah,
we're dealing
kick that guy.
Yeah, and I'd rather hear what you have to say, James, and I might have to have you repeat a few things, but whoever has control, if you can just clear him.
A little bit too much. Little bit too much PCP there, probably. Anyway, yeah. So go ahead, Hunter. Yeah.
I think what you're talking about is what Deleuze calls trees and rhizomes, right? So he's introducing this new idea of how we are cultural rhizomes, each creating new things through our individual processes, right? Our individual synthesis of differing ideas. I don't think the same way that you think, just because of my mere experience is entirely different than yours, even if we do agree on many, many different things. And then there's the tree, which is, so there's the rhizome of what you're talking about is this suspension, right? This idea of total rhizomatic connection, what he calls the machine, how we are basically a interaction of parts within us and beyond us, and how the machine of an idea of, say, sustainability or climate change or whatever is dependent on the machine of me, and vice versa, right? And then there's also the tree, which is the opposite of this suspension that you talk about, and it's about delving into it's an opposite sense of bad. So there's the suspension of if I don't have any cultural ties and I'm just isolated, then I end up losing my mind and eating, becoming a cannibal, for sake of the metaphor. But the opposite, then you become the ultimate conformist without the possibility of being an individual. And I think the thing is he's posing the argument of the rhizome as an argument against the status quo of society, right? And how we're social beings, and therefore we tend to try to conform to ideals that are beyond us. And so he's saying, let's be creators, let's become, let's try to break away from the rhizome. But he doesn't have a problem of being a tree either, I think, is what, as an example, just him personally, like, he calls himself, he doesn't like the label of like neo-Marxism, but he still calls himself a neo-Marxist. It's this strange duality that he allows to even show with his own personal life. So it's really more of like a hypothetical argument almost, even though he embodies it a lot in his work, for the sake of what would you call it, trying to maintain this non-biased argument. But he contradicts himself in later works, and he's continually battling the idea of a thought in a vacuum on both ends of the spectrum, if that makes sense. So
I think he wants the idea to exist in conflict. He wants ideas to be suspended in conflict. He doesn't like ideas that he can't enumerate, that he can't enunciate, as being in a state of conflict. To me, it reminds you a little bit of Christianity.
Yeah.
That's one of the big traps, in Western civilization, is trying to make every theory agree with Christianity. There's an extreme teleological success, happiness, and then there's an extreme failure, point of failure, and that they've got to come in conflict somehow. There's the force towards failure, call it the will or whatever, and that the conflict is going to emerge.
Yeah, there's in philosophy
inevitably
the idea of tension. I think may be thought of as something we don't desire, but I would suggest Nietzsche and Deleuze suggest that it is with the situation of tension that there is possibility for discovery or movement. But I have a question in relation to the Robinson. We're calling it the French Robinson article. Do we have any psychologists or psych majors that read that story? And I would really like to hear their thoughts on it, because throughout it, I just had the impression that, well, gee, if I was a psychologist, I probably would understand this a lot better.
You mean the book, not the article by Deleuze, but the book, the original book, the French version.
Just the one for this assignment, the one by Michael.
But it's by Deleuze.
Yeah, it's Deleuze's take on Michael Tournier's.
So which is your object? The book or the Deleuze's take?
The piece that we were given to read.
Oh, okay.
On the French version of Friday. If we have any psychologists or psych majors, I would be interested, because he used psychologicals. He talked about categories and psychosis and various psychological.
Oh yeah. He's he's apparently well read in Freud. I don't know if he was I don't know if he's a psychoanalyst, but he seems very close to it. Talks about schizophrenia a lot.
Yeah, so he and Guattari, Guattari ran essentially a psych board in France, and the two of them did a lot of experimentation with schizophrenic patients, including turning the clinic into sort of a commune type situation, and some very interesting things came out of it, but at the end, I think it was largely a disaster. But in terms of the way he is thinking about this is just my take, is that he's pushing back on some of those Western ideas that you mentioned, James, that we tend to slip into, and more along the lines of what Stephen said, which is that we tend to want to encapsulate things in the Western mind, right? That things have to be in their categories, right? The idea of being, right? That this is a thing. It's easily encapsulatable, and rather pushing us toward the idea of becoming, which is everything's in flux, right? Any one thing that you take a snapshot of is just a snapshot in time, and you come back a minute later and it's going to be a little bit different. It's going to change. It's going to be impacted by its environment and by the things it's impacting. There's a constant flux among all things, and that's I think why the Robinson Crusoe story is so unique, right? Is that we tend to think of all of the things that we have influence on and that have influence on us being in a society with other human beings, right? That we can kind of imagine that we're influencing our community and our community's influencing us. We can kind of wrap our head around that. But then you go and take yourself out of this other, right, and put yourself on an island. Is that flux still happening? I think, Terry, that you're talking about what is the psychology behind that. I don't know that there's a ton of clinical psychology that backs up where he's trying to go with it, but that's kind of where I see that he's trying to get us to tease those ideas out. Are we still in flux? And what does that look like from a subjective experience point of view.
When we all think that we want to be autonomous, I think Deleuze is saying, be careful what you wish for. Because if you go down that path or you go through that door, be careful. The result may not be something you counted on or you bargained for. You may not appreciate how dependent and what a social creature you truly are. I mean, supposedly, Robinson Crusoe was on the island for 28 years. Nope, but that was fiction. It's kind of based upon this Scotsman from some island, and he was on there for 4 years. Now, the Juana, thank you, James. What was her name? Juana Maria? She was on the island. Maria. Yeah, she was on the island for 18 years. So the question I have is, would you characterize the person that they picked up off the island as being dehumanized? Because Deleuze steers clear of that phrase. He's not saying that this is a dehumanation, and I'm still struggling with that. But I got the impression that society basically categorized her as dehumanized, but Deleuze may not have. I don't know.
I think there's also something about, when you talk about flux, it's also about the individual, because he's saying that we're assemblages. So we're in flux. We constantly change. We're trying to get our bearings in the relationship of the assemblages that we are, that are constantly shifting.
Yeah, and it draws me to what Matt said and what you actually said, James, when you were reading the piece that we were to read. You talked about how he contradicts himself, almost like he has this interplay of challenge. I think that's how you phrased it, something to that effect. And then Matt also referenced this idea of creating this conflict of opening up opportunities by actually challenging your ideas. He had another phrase for it. I think it was, to the contrary position, to put yourself in that situation. So whether you land on an island or if you just are living in a status quo situation, that you can create that for yourself through that method.
It's being your own biggest critic, right? It's creating your character when no one else is looking, right? Which is not so easy because everybody's looking until you're on an island, right?
Didn't Sartre talk about that when he talked about how you saw yourself in the mirror? You remember that little story he told about you're looking through the keyhole, spying on someone, and then you caught yourself looking through the keyhole. And for that moment, there was an impression or critical impression that you had of yourself. Is that kind of, Hunter, what you?
I'm unfamiliar with that. I'm going to write that down. But that's essentially that's what it's a suspension of yourself for the sake of viewing yourself, right? It's this weird non-duality that then becomes a duality, right? It's
That's as I recall the piece, that's exactly what he talked about. For those few moments, you are looking at you.
Yeah.
Because
I mean, what's more, interesting, if I may say about that story, is that in fact it's not simply him looking in the mirror. I don't think the notion of a mirror is mentioned, but what happens is there is somebody else. Sartre is describing somebody who's looking in the mirror, through the keyhole, and then he suddenly becomes aware that somebody else is watching him, and then this changes his whole, perception, of himself. Now, what's, interesting about this is not that it's a mirror, but it is a mirror of society, that he's looking at himself through the eyes of other people, which I think is very poignant here.
And Lacan, that's essentially what Lacan does, right? Is he essentially says that the human subjectivity doesn't start until the mirror stage, which is when the human baby recognizes itself in the mirror, and at that point is when the subjective begins. And you can push back on that, but that's one of his big claims.
Yeah, when you put a mark on the child's forehead, and the one time you do that, and they look in the mirror and they reach up and touch the spot on their forehead, they realize that mark is on them. Anyway.
So to tell you must have heard of the monkey in the mirror.
Yes, that's it. Yeah,
that's it. The chimpanzee, enlightenment, when a chimpanzee becomes self-conscious.
Yes, and a 3-year-old. I'm told it's right between 2 and 3-year-olds with humans.
And 6 years old for chimpanzees.
And you believe it.
And
you believe that.
75-year-old for men.
Yes.
You believe it.
Yes.
You don't realise these YouTube videos are just made up,
They're not YouTube. This is research.
This is the same rubbish. You're always making up stuff.
All books are rubbish.
It's like
all research is rubbish.
It's like the crow they got that used the toothpicks to get stuff and unlock something. Trained, absolutely trained, and you believe
Corbyn's
the crow worked it out for itself.
You don't believe Corbyn's
You guys, this is the trouble with you rationalists. Everybody will take you to the cleaners.
Yeah, that's the problem. This is a problem with the social sciences. It's like, and I guess it can go into behavioral animal psychology. When they try to say, well, look, this here we have this dolphin, and this dolphin was never self-aware, and then we put a mirror on it, and then suddenly the dolphin acted incredibly self-aware, and so for the first time in its life, it experienced self-awareness, and like kind of like incredible deductions, incredibly implausible deductions, just simply based on trying to want a hypothesis so bad, that they want to prove a hypothesis so badly that they were willing to put any kind of description behind it. And then that applies to chimpanzees too. The idea that there's no self-conscious chimpanzees in the forest, but then if you put a mirror there one day, all of a sudden all the chimpanzees start posing for a selfie. Maybe it looks like that, but it's not that they weren't self-conscious before the selfie.
Well, there's a differentiation in self-consciousness. There's an awareness of yourself, but there's the ability to project that awareness objectively. Like, for example, you might say, here am I have a subjective, and there is the world. But the objective ego takes things a step further, and this might be the special ability of man. That is to picture yourself standing in the world. We don't know if animals operate at that level.
Okay.
Let's get Warren in. Come on, guys. Warren?
Story about Kanzi. I have to tell a story about Kanzi. He was a bonobo. They trained him to communicate by touching symbols on a piece of cardboard. Okay? And every now and then, he would go take this piece of cardboard and go sit in the corner and start touching symbols. And if you tried to look over his shoulder to see what he's doing, he'd turn the cardboard so you couldn't see what he was doing.
You believe it? I don't. Trained.
I mean, but don't you believe in the spectrum of a consciousness? Insects, mice, dogs, chimpanzees, humans. Doesn't it fit into our, understanding?
Yeah. Animals have a certain sort of awareness, and in fact, they're even better at doing some things that humans are.
Yeah. Why do you adopt this speciesist view that only humans can be self-conscious?
Because I am a speciesist, and I'll put me up against the wall and shoot me while I say, I wish I had more than one life to give for Donald Trump.
Well, I'd like to know what would possibly count as evidence for animal self-consciousness for Stephen. What would count as evidence for it?
I explain there's different types of self-consciousness. An animal is probably aware that it is an existence. It has feelings, drives. It's probably slightly aware. I have a physical existence, but the ability to picture yourself standing in the environment might be a uniquely human feature. They call it the objective ego. It's a bit like you in a dream.
Being able to represent yourself in your imagination as an object in space, kind of like a top-down view of self as body in space. Well,
think of lucid dreaming. Now, in a dream, you have in a dream you have awareness, right? And you are sort of aware that you are a person. You have ideas about yourself. But generally in a dream, it's like we're following a script. Now, there's a difference with lucid dreaming. When you suddenly wake up, hey, I'm in a dream. I mean, last time I did that, I was dreaming. I was standing in the field and I was thinking, am I dreaming? I'll try to fly. So I flapped my hands and flew up in the air. Do you get what I mean? And I don't see it as a continuous line. I think, like Colin Wilson said, we'll find out that these things are more like a series of steps. Bang, you go from 1 to 2. Bang, you go from 2 to 3.
I was just wondering what it is. How is it that you define self-consciousness so that other animals don't have it? What's the magical ingredient?
Well, I'm talking about objective self-consciousness. That's when I can picture myself as an object in the environment. The first time I learned to do that was when I stood up. I became consciously aware when I was 5 months old. But it was only when I stood up for the first time, learned to stand and walk, that I suddenly realised, hey, I'm actually a person standing in the world. That was
so
the first
in an experimental setting, how would you devise an experiment to see if animals have that power?
I'm not a scientist. I'd have to probably spend a lot of time with thinking about it and all that sort of stuff. But why I warn about these TV programs is these people are deliberately out training animals to do these tricks. And then people go and believe it.
I know it is. Can you give me an example of what an animal might do that would be evidence for you that it has the type of self-consciousness that you just defined?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I suppose there would be an activity. It would have to be, see, when they say they taught a bonobo to use word symbols and languages, I say it doesn't really understand things that way because it's they have a language in whatever they do, grunts. They probably have a monosyllable to indicate dangerous animal or something like that. So you might say that there are very simple words inside a bonobo's head.
So the self-picturing in space, it has nothing to do with what would count as evidence?
Well, put it this way, I don't believe a bonobo or a chimpanzee could actually create a sentence of thoughts. It could probably have a single thought, or word thought, danger, dangerous animal, yeah, freak, run.
Is that related? Is that related to the being able to picture yourself in space, forming sentences?
Well, I'm just pointing out the ability to form sentences. I mean, you can think up a sentence or an entire paragraph, but I would say animals have no more than a series of syllables. They cannot really string word concepts together. They have simple words in the form of a syllable, a sound which might indicate danger or something like that. But not that structured sentence.
I don't think that's true.
If I gave a paragraph long string of commands, like sit down, wait a minute, stand up, grab the green cube, walk over to the toilet, and put a hat on Jill. If like something really long, if the animal sat there and listened to me and then carried out those commands, would it have anything like self-consciousness? Is that what you're saying?
Well, that'd be effectively it, but you could train an animal to do all those steps.
That's what I'm saying. So your definition is based on self-picturing, and your access is based on language, but there's no language thing that could ever show it.
Well, where's the language in animals? There would be some language, but very, very primitive language, even in chimpanzees. Show me where the chimpanzees use language as a tool in their daily routine.
But I think this has been done. I mean, there are chimpanzees like a Washoe who have used, have you given the word for duck, they're given the word for bird, you're given the word for water, and you're given the word for like, and Washoe says things, I like what, a water birds or ducks.
And I say it's nonsense made up.
Well, this is research. When do you say that research,
this is the trouble. There you are, the rationalist again, believing in your rationalist mumbo jumbo and superstition.
No. I'm kind of in favor of ending the general dialogue section of the evening, and that means that if you see me disappear, that'll be the reason I disappear. Yeah. So, does anybody have anything else to say about Deleuze?
I was waiting for this conversation to happen because as soon as Matt made the comment of, do you guys write about humans and shoelaces versus humans and monkeys? Why is there such, the fascination to prove this distinction between human and animals? I was waiting for this. I was waiting for it to come to the forefront here. Just kind of using Deleuze as a guide. It's interesting that we use the parameters that we use for humans to describe animals. That somehow so if I said I think that the dolphins are going to outlive us and have more intelligence than us, I'm not going to necessarily equate it to human terms. I see it going beyond what I would necessarily see. I mean, a dolphin lives a very different life. I can't even suppose that I would know all the conditions that they live with, and whether their intelligence can be equated to human intelligence. So I always find it kind of interesting that when we sort of see humans as being in a hierarchy above animals, that we use it, with human terms, which kind of creates uneven playing field, rather than seeing that there's other forms of intelligence. And I think Deleuze would be the one who would say, expanding my mind is that there might be things that, I can't equate it to human conditions. It would be something that I would have to explore and hopefully maybe capture in different ways. But to just put it in human terms, I'm not sure if that's the way to go when we talk about animal intelligence.
Shauna, thank you. I think you're really onto something, and I think you're touching on, and I'm asking the concept of his bringing in the concept of difference. And so if we're going to reinvent or de-world ourselves and re-world ourselves, when we come back on the other side, we have to have, I think, kind of getting back to what Scott was talking about, is a different set of references, ones that don't use ourselves as the ruler or the gauge to judge. But I want to invite the group here to have a thought experiment. And the first point would be is the concept of loneliness. And he was a psychologist, or he had the clinic and a psychologist. Is it possible that as a result of the work he did there, he began to appreciate individuals who were isolated and alone through their circumstances, and they literally had no social contact or interaction with other humans, that there began to be a deconstruction or a breakdown of the psyche, which he put into this article. And then the other thing, how about, let's see if any of you, and this is a challenge for you, what experience are you actually, this is like a phenomenology question, as a result of stay-at-home orders and isolation with the COVID-19, we're philosophers, and we are supposed to be reflective and sort of be able to think outside the box. Have any of you kind of begin to wonder what's happening with me as a result of my not being able to interact with my fellow human beings. And I suggest the fact that people are violating, shall we say, requests and not doing what probably should be the smart move in relation to social interaction. It's because of this ontological or this ontic need within us at a base level for interaction with humans or our fellow human beings, and that's what he was getting at. So anyway, chew on that for a while.
Okay, since you asked it as a question, I'll go volunteer my opinion, and that is that I've become more experiential because of isolation. So by becoming more isolated, I haven't become more isolated. Maybe I've become more social. Maybe it's the opposite for me. But I definitely am more experiential. Even when I'm alone, I'm gauging my experience all day long. I'm checking my decisions, gauging my experience, changing my reference points. So I've found the whole journey very rewarding in that kind of sense. I even signed up for a phase 3 vaccine trial, so it was kind of extremely an opening. It was an opening for me, and it was also an opening to become more serious about philosophy, because my opportunities to communicate with people in other parts of the world improved because of the pandemic. So whether that was a good thing or a bad thing, I don't know, but I think it was very good for me, and it means that I'll have to make some changes to the way I live once there is a kind of like a societal normalcy is established.
Thank you. Deleuze would be proud of you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Deleuze. Yeah. I'm not going to throw myself, but Deleuze's answer, yeah, I mean, the thing is, Deleuze threw himself out the window, right? But I mean, he was depressed, apparently. He had, I don't know what's been written about that, but he did, the only thing I read on Wikipedia probably was that he freaked out, and he freaked out because he couldn't write. He had lost his ability to write because of the pain he was suffering and so forth. So, but if anyone knows more about that, I'd like to hear about it. But the idea is that we cope. You know, we experience and we deal with, you know, kind of like the kind of life we're given. But I'm finding it's much less a case of like having to go pick and choose my friends. You know, like back in when I lived in San Diego, I had some specific friends that I would look up to and be able to communicate deep thoughts with, and you know, that would respect me and so forth. But here it's now with the Zooms, it's much more exciting, and my mind is expanding rapidly, and I'm really enjoying it. And so I think if anyone else is experiencing that or experiencing anything else, I'd like to hear about it.
But this is the only Zoom session that I go to, because usually when I'm participate in Zoom, it's very boring. And certainly I think it's a undermining of human contact in relation to actual presence of the person. I don't think you're able to engage with the person in the same way when they're present in the room as when they're on Zoom. So this has been happening, perhaps a form of dehumanization since the beginning of the internet age.
But not since the beginning of telephony?
You know, what's interesting is I am a more in-person type of person myself. Yet what's cool is finding some people that were more silent. in-person interactions blossoming, and me finding that I'm getting to know certain people much better through a different medium. So some people, I guess, have different levels of comfort.
So what I was getting at, that those are all good comments, and I think they're what we're hearing is sort of a I'm sorry not to criticize, but a sort of a normalcy. What Deleuze was talking about and was warning us or letting us know is what would happen if we were totally isolated. Well, guess what? We didn't want to go there. As soon as we were doing in-face meetups in Austin, where we would meet at a cafe and would be maybe 10, 15 of us, and we'd do in the face. But as soon as that cafe shut down and we went on Zoom, man, we're there. Oh boy, I got to have my human interaction, so to speak. I mean,
yeah, adapt or die, Terry. Adapt or die. You know.
Has anyone read the Decameron? It's an Italian book, Botticelli. In the Decameron, there's stories about the rich people. Some of the stories are about rich people that went to the country when the bubonic plague occurred, which is a much more horrible death, kind of, than it seemed more horrible anyway than COVID-19, but and more deadly. But the rich people would just go out in the country, go live in the country, because there were less rats in the country. So the prospects for getting infected were much lower, and they would have party. They would just spend all the time partying. They would use their wealth to just support themselves, living in the country, and have the best life that they chose to in their country estates.
I think that would be what you termed earlier, a suspension, a dangerous suspension. Yeah, like you know, like for them it's good, but what is how good is isolation, right? If you're just gonna wallow in your riches, you know. Well,
they would tell stories in the book by Botticelli. They would tell stories, and that made the book a hit. He sold a lot of copies because these were good stories that he wrote.
To check it out,
that they told, yeah.
But to Terry's point, yeah, I found myself becoming more, or to Terry's question, I found myself becoming much, because I'm normally to what Hannah Arendt calls contemplative philosophy. I've found myself doing the opposite in isolation, which is kind of oxymoronic if you think, you know, and reaching out for more social things through the access of, you know, Zooms like this, which I had never done anything like this before COVID, right? But like I said to Terry, you adapt or die, you know, you move on with it, you know, and if you don't move on with it, you're going to get left behind, you know.
So thank you, Hunter. I think you're hitting the nail on the head here by sharing that with us. Are you perhaps getting close to what Deleuze was in this particular piece, you know, was getting at? Is it a fear of not having the other with a capital O in our lives? We don't have the courage individually. We don't have the courage. Think about it. Do you have the courage to go to an isolated island for a year? I mean, really, who has the courage to do that? Anyway, those are the kind of questions that we as philosophers, we ask ourselves as part of achieving autonomy.
No, I mean, it's difficult without being thrown to the wolves of isolation, right? I mean, it's hard to just say without being, you know, thrown in a cell for, you know, for a year, like, but we are like, I agree with Deleuze in regards to the fact that I am a rhizome that is completely dependent on cultural ideas. I'm constantly open to that, I'm also constantly keeping it in check in regards of and what Antonio Gramsci calls cultural hegemony, you know, where it's complete, what's it called? Complete conformity to the social norm, right? So it's this constant, when you're put in isolation, it's this constant battle to not seek that social want that much, right? It's this strange paradox, right? This strange duplicity, right?
I don't know how much of this is a social phenomenon now, a cultural phenomenon. If we look back at our ancestors who sort of weren't living in agrarian civilizations, like a lot longer before that, there were times when these ancestors had months and months of like walking about without meeting another person, or without meeting people outside their tribe at least. But often the case it was that, like, you know, hunters would not meet another person for a month or more. And so, yeah, it seems as though like we don't necessarily have the a biological need to always be around other people. Because anthropologists suggest that it was the case that it was quite a lot of isolation before agrarian civilization kicked off.
I'd just like to read this very short quote, this counter view by Hervé Guibert. It is, "To create beauty, not out of love or liberty, but solitude forever, you must live and die in a dungeon." That is the counter view. I mean, what that means, I'll leave it to yourselves.
Well, and I think as people are talking, I mean, Terry, you brought up a good point of sort of thinking of what would be isolation for the majority of people, but we probably all are in a situation where we have similar access, we have internet. During the pandemic, of course, groups have been affected very differently. Some people have seen it just sort of a subtle shift of how they communicate and interact. Others are in dire need. So they're feeling really the full force of it, and it affects them much more. But then even, you know, through Hunter's conversation and others, this idea of also how much are you aligned with the mainstream world? And so for some people, even if there wasn't financial distress, they feel like a duck out of water all the time. They're not aligned with the mainstream, either by their cultural, ethnic background, or even just their attitudes and views. Maybe wrong place, wrong time. Maybe they can find it in a different, you know, setting in the world. But I would say these people think all the time about where they're situated in their world. They're constantly reflecting. They need to. It's sort of a survival mechanism to navigate such. So if you're not thinking about things all the time, well, we're philosophers, so all of us are probably still thinking of things all the time, but, you know, maybe with a different necessity. But yeah, I do think that there are people who are more along the lines of living Deleuze's suggestion because of what they've been born into and who they are as people right at the beginning.
Right, and that's a great point, and that's because, I mean, the only world I have known is the world of the internet, right? That's what I've grown up in. I mean, I'm not yet 30, and so I'm a 90s baby. I only know the way that I can connect non-physically, right? Now, physically, I do prefer physical, absolutely, but the internet is an appendage that I have never lived without, right? And so I think it was Black Star that came up. It didn't have a vivid image, but to his point, I think often about what my experience would be like, you know, in the middle of nowhere in the 1800s, right, being a mountaineer or whatever. But I cannot possibly put myself in those shoes because even whenever I go to Silverton, Colorado, there are people everywhere, right? You know, and so it's just not a world that I can relate to. I wish I could.
But to Black Star's point, and I would love him to comment here, yes, my understanding is we've been civilized agrarian societies for about 10,000 years, roughly 10,000 years. But we have been tribes, and one can entertain the thought that tribalism is exhibiting its hand or its energy every day. And that's the phrase that you hear frequently used in politics. And I'll leave it at that. And it's strong. Look how strong
it's certainly
it is.
strong. Yeah. Well, I mean, if we look at the time in which we've been a tribal species, it's a lot longer than we've been a civilization species. Now, I mean, you can say, well, the anatomically modern human has only been around for about 150,000 years or whatnot, give or take 50,000 years. Surely our ancestors, our ancestors before modern anatomic humans were also tribal, and so we've evolved to be tribal, and so it's really hard to sort of just throw civilization at us and try and civilize us and uproot our evolutionary history, our wiring. However we evolved to survive in the African savannah for so many years is really what went into wiring our minds and our brains and our biology in the way that it is. So it's unsurprising that tribal behavior is really playing itself out in this,
and now you're a sick
world.
animal.
Sorry, Stephen?
Now you're a sick animal. There's a part of you still longing for the African veldt.
Well, that's yeah, sure. Civilization, it's discontent. We all give up something to, I guess, gain the benefits of this civilization, don't we?
I think there's this assumption that we couldn't do it without capitalism, and there's a kind of like a default, kind of like accepted assumption, social assumption that we couldn't do it without capitalism and the nation state. The idea that we live in nations and we're adapted to people that speak our own language, and because of that, and we're adapted to, we have conformist value systems, or we belong to a nonconformist subculture or tribe. But the idea is that we're free inside these nations. We have some degree of freedom to form our culture and form our subculture, and participate in the dominant money culture that's been established for thousands of years already. So,
I mean, I'm concerned that there's so much emphasis in this conversation on the socio-biological structure, nature of man, or the social structure of man. I mean, I would think, what about the phenomenological possibilities of man? When I think of the US, I mean, the US is a very diverse place, and on the other hand, you have very strong social structures, and on the other hand, you have rugged individuals who go off into the wilderness to live their own lives. I mean, doesn't that say something?
Yeah, the campers, our sales are improving all the time. They're probably because of COVID, partly because of COVID-19. So in other words, the people will do what they want to do. People will kind of pursue their desires, and the way it sort of like comes up in a free society. They kind of begin to pursue their desires, and you can sort of you could make a living as a sociologist just cataloging how they follow their desires and and trying to predict what they're going to do next.
But the point is that they can do it, and they're happy doing it. I mean, lots of people. I mean, I've lived a lot of my time of my life, on my own. I mentioned them earlier. I was a sailor. Sometimes I sail on my boat, and I go away for a couple of months, and perhaps I don't speak to anybody or see anybody for days or weeks, and I'm quite happy about that. I mean, this is a possibility. How much it's a possibility, I don't know. But because there are people who do it, show that it is a possibility.
I guess my question, Derek, is that while those things happen, to what extent do they happen? Because to me, if I asked 10 people just randomly on the street, what is life about? what gives you joy or happiness or even purpose. I think I would hear a lot of canned responses. And so how much has society dictated that, and people have sort of fallen into believing this is what they should be going for?
Let me add real quick, like to James and Shauna. James, you threw out, and you asked for it. You threw out the phrase about desire. Well, out of the article that we were given to read on page 306, he writes, "I desire nothing that cannot be seen, thought, or possessed by a possible other. That is the basis of my desire. It is always other," that's with a capital O, "who relate my desire to an object."
It's now always others yes, that relate my desire?
The point he's making is I don't desire something that isn't in relation or has some connection to others. I desire things that others see as desirable. I desire things that are thought of as a value, which is a relativism. I desire, as compared to desiring things completely autonomously. Now, I'm not talking about food. He's talking about I desire things that only others, because they're placing value on these objects, then therefore I desire them. And that's what Deleuze is saying about desire.
Yeah, but is that good or not so good? I mean, this is a consensus view. I would think, personally, I would like to go beyond the consensus view. And in response to Shauna, I mean, I think asking people for a sociological view, I mean, that's a sociology, anthropology, but philosophy surely is about a possibility rather than a consensus, because one person does it, because Jesus goes to heaven, because he resurrects, that's it. One person has done it, we can all do it.
Yeah, I don't really, I don't get Terry. I don't get the need to look into what others are doing. Of course, you want to you want to succeed in whatever social contracts, obligations, kind of formations, ensembles, structures that you entangle yourself in. But I don't see the need to go outside that. I don't see the need to possess others' possessions. I don't see the need to possess others' objects of worship, whether they be spiritual or material. I don't think of myself as fully autonomous, but I do see myself as independent and having my own demands for satisfaction and my own thoughts about it.
Interesting. It's funny, I consider myself extremely independent, but it's through the filter of a hive mind that can, a billion people can think a billion times faster than I can. And therefore come up with ideas way faster than just I can, but I can still filter through the bullshit as much as I want, and pick and choose the simulations that come into my personal life, right? So it's this strange, again, like kind of with Deleuze, this paradox of being a social being, but then also having this sense of autonomy to where each rhizome, it's like a snowflake, we're all taking these different ideas, but yet claiming them as complete individuals. Right?
And Hunter, to your point, I think you're beginning, in my impression, you're beginning to touch on Heidegger's concept of authenticity. when he said we are thrown into a society or a culture with our thrownness, okay, he accepts that you were born into it, you didn't choose it, but within that realm, your mission is to the extent that you can and still flourish, is to remain authentic and autonomous.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, the internet is my hammer, right?
Well, and what you were speaking to as well is this idea that I certainly believe people have that sense and do make choices within the available choices. And maybe that's the best way to say it. I do believe there's a level of autonomy. But if each of us went down 5 whys of why we're here, even in this philosophy group, like, why are you attending? Well, I like talking with people. Why is that important? Well, because blah, blah, blah. And you went all the way down. What's interesting is it starts to unearth some of these very basic, primitive necessities. The 5, do you have the 5 whys or something like that?
No, it's a, you can't read the title too well, but it's 300 pages on the subject of loneliness.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting is that we come from, I guess what I'm saying is I know I'm enculturated, even if I feel that a lot of times I live outside of not extremely outside the boundaries, but I live outside the boundaries enough that there's discomfort in certain spaces that I'm in. And, again, I'm not a candidate for extreme situations, but, it's still there. But I also know how much I'm influenced by culture. So while I feel I'm very independent, as you said too, Hunter, I do know that ultimately a lot of the choices I'm making are because of the context I'm in.
Yeah, and I thank you. You've all been very indulgent. But I think the idea is to be aware. If one is not aware of some of the issues that Nietzsche and Deleuze talk about, then you risk becoming the they and becoming, he called it the structure others, structure.others. That was his phrase for the herd, the they. You just use Nietzsche and Deleuze as litmus tests, and that's how I suggest we take them.
Yeah, I agree with that awareness. I had the thought recently. I'd like to sit down and really delve into it, but Baudrillard talks about simulacra and simulation, whereas I think it's more of stimuli and stimulation, and the difference between that is the awareness of the simulation. It's not just living in the matrix, it's escaping it, but still using it as a tool, right? Sorry, Derek, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, of course, we have choices within those options that society offers us, but we also have the possibility of creating new choices that are not offered us. I mean, these happen. I mean, if they didn't, then society would remain the same. It's because there are new ideas that are being brought about by people, that ideas and philosophy, advances, and each one of us has the possibility to do that.
Yeah, it's I hear Derek. I think you basically making a call for action. So I'll second that approach. In other words, this part of philosophy, even though it might be fishy to some of us old timers, who didn't grow up in France the way Deleuze and Guattari did. And didn't immerse ourselves totally inside the concepts of Freud enough, perhaps. I don't know. I did read books by Freudians and some books by Freud, too. But
imagine yourself surrounded by Frenchmen all your life that drive you crazy.
That's probably the trick. That's the trick, Stephen. That's right. So the but the idea that there's a call for action, that there's a call, that's very Heideggerian, and I definitely second that idea that this is a worthwhile exercise if we see it, even if we don't understand the preponderance of paradoxes that Deleuze is immersing us in. We at least can understand that we share a call for action.
And I think the call for action can be, by circumstance, a part of our lives. We could be born into, we could start off our lives by being drawn through a hedge backwards, always feel ourselves the outsider. Or in my case, in Singapore, I am a foreigner. I am like the David Bowie who fell to earth. You think he's human, but he's not. He's really from this other world, trying to get back to this other world.
Nice. By the way, that the author of that book is the same author that wrote The Queen's Gambit, which is now on Netflix. I really recommend it.
That's a great show.
Yeah, it's a great show. Yeah.
I think the thing with a lot of people, you seem to act or think you're your own creator. That's an illusion. You're just a dog on a leash. Whatever cosmic force or whatever, you're just an illusion. It's everyone thinks, I want to be the biggest basketball player or the biggest soccer player, the biggest. It's all nonsense.
Are you talking to me?
A lot of you.
Hey, let's be logical, Stephen. Holy smokes! Let's return back to let's return back to our logical debate.
Young guys are always thinking, I want to be this, I want to be that, and it's all an illusion, man. You discover that when you get older. It's nonsense. It's like saying I like women. That is nonsense. It's like saying I like food. Okay. That's nonsense as well. I've been tricked. I want nirvana. I want out.
You realize that there's some people growing up wanting to be the best basketball players, and they do become the best basketball players. You do know that, right?
Yeah, I feel sad for them that they're never going to wake up to their false reality.
James, are you and David going to start a discussion about what next?
Oh, I don't know what's next. No, it's David knows. Yeah, I'll just have to see. There he is.
Are we ready to start that discussion?
Yeah, I think we're ready now. Yeah, thanks, David.
The impression I was getting was everybody was big on the idea of going into the postmodernism. Either that or the 19th century, which would be Kant and some others. But postmodernism seems... The problem with postmodernism, though, I don't have the reading. I have the audio, but I don't have the specific reading. I can tell you what the book is, but you're on your own there.
Could we do some Hegel bashing?
He wants a Hagel-Bashing Seminar.
There's Hegel cover.
Why waste our time?
Did Matt do a Hegel?
Yeah, that would be the 19th century class. Hegel's covered in that one. If we wanted to do that one.
Yeah, I'd like to. Hegel-Bashing fashion would really do my number.
Look out! Stephen's going to recommend Hobbes.
Yeah, the class is 19th century. It starts with Kant, and there is Hegel involved.
Yeah.
But 19th century.
Okay, so David, you mentioned
it's 18th century, David.
19th century.
Yeah, I know, but Kant is 18th. I'm sorry, Hegel is 19th. Yeah.
Okay, so David, you mentioned Kant. I mean, Kant says so much. He's so much, and so much of our thinking comes from Kant. And without Kant, it's so hard to think about all these other people. So it's logical for me to start with Kant.
I would definitely I'd vote for Kant myself as in our next subject.
Well, let me ask a question, David. I would like your input on this. Do we consider Deleuze as the last existential philosopher?
I don't think he's not part of a. If you want to lump him together with, Nietzsche, I think that's fine. I just I see sort of the two tribes of existentialism. That's a fine concept. I'm not opposed to it. But anyway, I don't know what's to come. I think we went through one of the most controversial philosophers this time, Levinas. So I learned a bit about from that. So I don't know what we're going to study in postmodernism. I've been through Kant and Hegel, and I don't think I want to be in a general discussion group about it. Although the whole subject is interesting because that was basically the genesis of Marxism. So it brings up and which Marxism affected Freud and so on and so forth. So this is like this is something that's very pertinent to society, to modern society, modern civilization. The 19th century philosophers, going back to Kant, who was writing in the 18th century.
Yeah. So would you drop out if we did go into Kant? The other thing would be postmodernism, which would be. I won't say I'll drop out for sure. I'm just saying I'm not as hot about it as the postmodernism because I'm kind of like the postmodernism would be getting a taste of something I haven't really learned a lot about, except for Derrida. I read some Derrida.
Yeah.
And some Foucault. Yeah.
Derrida would be the first on the postmodern class.
Yeah, and I'm with James. Something that might sound or feel like contemporary philosophy, or philosophers like Richard Rorty with his neo-pragmatism, and just to see what some of the modern thought. That at least that's my vote. I'm only one vote, obviously, but post-structuralism or modernism, and then on into, deconstruction and some of the contemporary concepts. That's my vote.
Yeah. So Shauna wants to do Kant. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it seems pretty split, actually. A lot of people want to go for Kant.
Well, Kant is not awful. It's just that Kant is like a big dish. And, from a 21st century standpoint, he's a big dish.
Yeah, but
so,
the Matt Calarco version.
In other words, you can get very hostile while you're reading Kant. But that's cool. We could definitely do it, and I think people like Derek might help keep us on track. And cooler heads might prevail. So I'll go either way.
Yeah.
And I can fill in quite a bit on the Hegel. I really love Hegel. It's true. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, it does seem to be leaning towards Kant and the 19th century class, which I have ready to go. So we could do that starting next week.
Also, and the other advantage of the 19th century class is that there's no royalties on books. So even if you didn't have the books, we could go find free copies of them.
That's true.
Yeah.
Well, I do want to recognize the contributions that the individuals have made for this series. And I'm appreciative and make sure you get recognition. David and I guess mostly James and Stephen and the others that are regulars. I appreciate your input. I've enjoyed this.
I definitely want to echo that. Like I'm a newbie to all this, and so this has been great to just hash out ideas in the open, and I'm not a philosopher by training, I'm just by leisure, right? But this has been fantastic,
Yeah, it's a good bug to catch, that's for sure.
Well, Hunter, what do you think about Matt's lectures specifically? I mean, are they helpful to you?
I really enjoy Matt. Yeah. I mean, he's the type of professor that I enjoy. It's like, one that is very knowledgeable, but also is laid back as hell. I mean, but he seems like badass dude. Like I want to sit down and pick his brain, But yeah, I really enjoy his lectures and enjoy the literary curation that comes along with it.
You once said that some of his colleagues in the department have said to him about his teaching, "You're actually explaining it to them. You're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to leave it for them to do. He does it for you. That's wrong to do."
Yeah, I'm never going to forget where he teamed up, made up the teams. That was a great, I don't know, metaphor or analogy. It really helped me figure out where those philosophers stood in their project. That was a clever idea.
Enjoyed that. I really enjoyed that too, because it wasn't really teams that you would think of, and then all of a sudden it makes complete logical sense. It's very interesting. But yeah, I mean, I have no frame of reference in regards to how normal philosophy is normally taught, but I find his way of teaching very energizing and liberating in a way. Yeah.
Yeah, as you said, most philosophy departments do not read Heidegger, do not read Nietzsche, do not read we just did him, Levinas, and if they do read him, then they don't understand him, and they just don't know what to do with these people. I mean, it's mostly 95% of academic philosophy departments teach analytic philosophy.
Interesting. Yeah, my background is in architecture, and in architecture, there's an infatuation with pre-modernism or postmodernism, and especially Derrida. They're like on the forefront is Deleuzian thought, and certain universities are going that way, but it's a lot of postmodernism, and so that's how I see the academic lens is through postmodernism. So that's interesting that how that structure is in philosophy. Not thinking about Heidegger, not thinking about Nietzsche, not thinking about that's. I wouldn't see that as the way, but I mean that's. Hey, I mean, I didn't go to philosophy school.
we may well do the postmodern class in 32 weeks.
No worries. I mean, all this is great. I don't care who the hell we do. I was going to defer my vote.
Yeah, I'm really sorry, Sean, that we got lost you for a long time because of the doing 2 per week.
Well, it ends up being that I really get home around 5 or 6 on the Monday, and that's kind of the slot that I had in place. And if I got home later, then it didn't allow for me to listen to the videos and do the reading. And I thought, in fairness to others, I winged it one time. I think I told you guys, I said I only got 1 video, but I felt it wasn't fair to the rest of the group joining in if I didn't really have the content material. But it depends. I mean, if it works well for everybody, then I'm just going to have to adapt, as Hunter said, adapt. but I did find that sometimes it was maybe just my perspective, but when we had just the 1 video, we could go in more depth and even pull out actual quotes from the readings. There was that advantage of going at a slower pace. But again, I'll defer to as Hunter said, I'll defer to what works best for the whole group.
I would, while I'm definitely open to whichever way, I would echo that. I kind of agree that going in depth, even if that means prolonging the length of a series, would be extremely beneficial.
Yeah, I was kind of getting the impression that, by the time we hit week 5 of Nietzsche, that everybody was ready to move on to something else. Right, James?
Well, we were out of material. The thing is, Nietzsche wasn't responsible for that. Like, if we'd wanted to, we could have made it a 2-year course, but we had enough material for what was it, 5 weeks? You said, yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. It would have been 5. It would have been 10 weeks if we'd done 1 per week. But we did 5. So.
Yeah, I think that the conflict is that. Here we go with conflict, but no, the conflict is that some people that already have exposure to these, to prolong it maybe isn't valuable for them. For me, where all this stuff is brand new, of course, it's value to have a slower pace.
All right. Well, yeah. Okay. If everyone's committed to the 32-week Kant in the 19th century class, and let's start it.
Yeah, it's for fun and philosophy for fun, and
be done at the beginning of summer
and get some reading done. Get our feet wet and explain it to each other.
Yeah, we'll be done sometime in the middle of summer. Who knows where we'll be by then?
Yeah, 32 weeks is philosophy in the 19th century, is it?
Yeah, I think it's.
That's how long Matt was. So Matt did 32 sessions.
Well, there are 16-week semesters and 2 classes per week, so that equals 32. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I've got that ready to go. So we can get that started next week.
So why didn't Matt do the postmodernists?
Yeah, I've got those as well.
Matt did postmodernists, did he?
Yeah, we could do that after we're done with the 19th century class, if we want to. I've also got a class on ethical theory. I've got a class on animal ethics.
There you go, Steve.
Wow!
Theory and animal ethics. That's yeah. But I'm a newbie here. I'm happy for everybody just to do the Kant stuff.
There's a class on Marx. Got that.
Yeah, the Kant is not so bad. If you it's the good thing about Kant is that you understand how controversial and how it's kind of a trigger. It's a trigger the subject of ethics is a trigger. So when you read Kant, you find out why the subject of rationalism and ethics is such a trigger. It's no longer pleasant like when you read Descartes or even Leibniz. It's like, but with Kant, you find out how it became a trigger.
Is it fair to suggest that Kant was a metaphysician?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and I asked that sort of
and not wrongly, not to insult him. In other words, that was the game. He picked a game, and he was a writer of useful, popular books. Like about he wrote a book on peace, wrote books on politics and various things, and animals. He wrote books on biology, and then he finally picked philosophy when he got a little older, and started writing. He had friendship with Newton. And he started writing books on philosophy, and for his model, he took Wolff. So Wolff was a formalist, and he used Wolff's model to write his books. And Wolff's model was actually pretty strong. And so if you read the book, if you read Critique of Pure Reason from beginning to end, or any of the other books, you'll find this incredible formal approach, and it's a little bit disappointing from a modern perspective, anti-delusion, but you'll learn something. It's kind of and it clarifies the fact that the modern interpretation of the word ethics is as loaded as it is. It's not just because of religion.
It's our duty to have a miserable time reading Kant.
Huh? I think when we talk about it, it should be fine. Like, in other words, you'll get a really left-wing view from me.
No, I mean, he was on about Judy, wasn't he? That was his...
Judy?
Judy.
Who's Judy?
His ethics. Kant's ethics was built around the concept of duty, wasn't it?
Duty. That was his judgment. That was the
ontology.
That was actually from Hume. He inherited that from Hume, and then he took parts of Hume wholesale, and then they took the formality of Wolff, and he blended those two together, and but you'll be amazed at the detail, the level of detail that he went into is just like overwhelming. That's the biggest problem with
Well, I have been trying to read Swedenborg.
What?
Oh, you never heard of Swedenborg? He was a mystic. He
No.
10 volumes of mysticism on the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
But Kant's read him, curiously enough, I believe. A lot of the big knobs read Swedenborg.
Yeah, he's a man of his time. Yeah, I was quite pleased when I found out what he thought about judgment. He understood that judgment was accessible to. He talked about table judgment. So in the critique of practical reason, he talks about chapter 3. He talks about table judgment, the fact that people just talk about their own judgments commonly. And so that was a pleasant surprise for me, because I had kind of like the impression that Kant was only interested in what he could think of himself, but he did believe that people had a normal way of thinking through things, which included their common everyday judgments.
Okay, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you for a wonderful evening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was illuminating.
Every Monday evening,
it was very illuminating. Yeah, we managed to forestall the postmodern period, which is incredible.
I know you're gonna go drink to that one tonight, huh, James?
symptom of COVID. Yeah.
Yes. Can't do without you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Terry.
Thanks, David. Thanks, James.
Good night, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Sean. Good night. Good night, Steve.
Until next week.
Good night, David.
Thank you. See you all
Nice
next
meeting
week.
you, Blackstar.
Hi, everyone.
Yeah, Hunter.
Night.
Yeah, take care.
And good day to you. Good day to you Aussies.
Good day, Steve.